says you're going to hell, okay? You got to leave. The scholars of the Jesus Seminar, which are hundreds and hundreds of people who know about all this stuff, say that there's a kernel of a piece of what Jesus said and did in those words. Of course, this was written down by Matthew 60, 80 years later, reinterpreting for his community. Okay? So it is believed that Jesus didn't do the damning part. Okay? He actually probably spoke the affirming and compassionate parts. And it's not just saying that we can only pick and choose, who Jesus was, but these are scholars trying to figure out the original personality of the guy. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. And damning to hell wasn't necessarily a Jewish thing back then anyway. It became part of the reaction to the repression of being Christian. So anyway, that said, I have allergies, so if I cough on you, you know it's just pollen. Okay, pollen mixed with my germs. Democracy. You didn't think I was going to say that, did you? Democracy is a form of government in which all eligible citizens participate equally, either directly or through elected representatives, in the proposal, development, and creation of laws. We all participate in creating laws, right? It encompasses social, economic, and cultural conditions that enable the free and equal practice of political self-determination. Got it? Don't ever forget it. Staple that to your underwear. No consensus exists on how to define democracy, but equality, freedom, and rule of law have been identified as important characteristics since ancient times. These principles are reflected in all eligible citizens being equal before the law and having equal access to legislative processes. For example, in a representative democracy, every vote has equal weight. No unreasonable restrictions can apply to anyone seeking to become a representative. And the freedom of its eligible citizens is secured by legitimized rights and liberties, which are typically protected by a constitution. So, when African Americans only had 3/4 of a vote, or was it 2/3 of a vote? Not necessarily a representative democracy. When women didn't have any vote at all, not necessarily a representative democracy. So, historically speaking, however, control within so-called democracies has often resided with an elite group. Those with social status, wealth, ethnicity, or gender considered superior by those within that group. People with power. On the other hand, there are democracies in which there arises a majority rule where the rights of minority groups are violated. True democracy has never been tried, right? It's never a real perfect version of it. But it's to be strived for, an unceasing social, political battle toward an envisioned utopia. Blah, 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 blah. Laws are created and enforced to ensure the safety and order of community life, so we don't run rampant and do stuff to each other. And theoretically, they are to protect the rights of every citizen. In our country, these laws are based on our Constitution and not on any religious book. Torah, Gospel, Quran, I Ching, or beyond. There are other nations that base their laws on a religious book. And there is much to be learned from such societies, positive and negative. All laws, religious and or secular, are subject to interpretation by those who practice law. In most societies, there's a penchant for leaning on what they call common law, or the body of interpretation that has gone before it. Other judges have said it's legal, then I'm going to say it's legal, sort of depending on your legal ancestors. The actions of our current Supreme Court in undermining 100 or more years of common law when it comes to the personhood rights of corporations is unprecedented and disturbing. To me. On the other hand, the changing interpretation of marriage law, leading to the end of DOMA, and increasing numbers of states declaring the rights of same-sex couples to marry, gives one hope that the rights of a vibrant minority are finally being recognized. So this cuts both ways, whether we like it or not. In Judaism, the Torah is being interpreted And the written accounts of those interpretations fill libraries, and all the contributions of rabbis are respected and referred to in study. Our Bible, which is a word that means library, is a record of some of the earliest interpretations, some of them in conflict with each other. The Gospels contain excellent examples of the reinterpretation of existing laws, which in their day and time did not separate religion and secular society in their intent. Our text this morning is actually the result of an early Christian community writing an account of Jesus reinterpreting Jewish law. And in the process, by writing it down, reinterpreting what Jesus may have said to fit their own circumstances. How's that for convoluted? And then what I say is yet another interpretation. Right? And what you think I said is another interpretation. Most scholars agree that Jesus, when reinterpreting Jewish law, leaned toward compassion rather than legalism. He broke a law that prohibited work on the Sabbath because somebody needed healing. Healing on the Sabbath, bad man. But he leaned toward compassion. He broke a law demanding the stoning of an adulterer because the people enforcing that law were being hypocritical, and it was only the woman being stoned and not the man. Let's see. In this particular text, Matthew's Jesus urged people to settle their differences out of court rather than risk the perils of official judgment. He urged people to stop lustful thoughts before they turn into behaviors that are harmful to self and other, which ended up being something that Jimmy Carter quoted and got in trouble for. Yeah. And seeing the emotional and financial damage done to women through divorce, he urged men to be more compassionate than legalistic when it came to enforcing divorce law. And just forget all that stuff about hell, okay? Hell is what we create for each other. All of these things are forms of reinterpretation of Jewish law in the direction of an ethical obligation to care for one another, to be directed by a loving God rather than the judgments of human legal systems. Of course, both sides in these arguments claim to be speaking for God. So it comes down to an interpretation of God, God's character. What kind of God does each party think God is? Basing laws on a secular constitution is an attempt to take that question out of the equation, your opinion about God. Laws are then to be based on what is best for the common good, what is fair, what is just. So it is interesting that in the United States of America, people we refer to as conservative Christians would involve themselves in shaping a legal definition of marriage under which the state is to grant rights to all its citizens. And it is interesting that they would base it on one biblical definition when there were 8 biblical definitions that were accepted in this particular ancient culture. And you've probably seen a lot of these going around on Facebook. Yes? No? If you want a copy of the sermon, there's a whole chart. But the first one is polygamous marriage, which is not polygamy, it's polygamy, which is the most common form of marriage in the Bible where a man has more than one wife. Okay? So that's number 1. Number 2, Levirate marriage, where a woman was widowed without a son. Her husband dies, and it's the responsibility of the brother-in-law or close male relative to take her in and impregnate her. And if the resulting child is a son, he would be considered the heir. So it's about property, the heir of the property of the family. That was number 2. So you guys get set up by your sister or your brother-in-law. 3, a man, a woman, and her property. And that property is usually a female slave. So it's like in Abraham and Jacob. They married a wife and her slave. A man, 1 or more wives, and some concubines. Another definition. The definition varies from culture to culture, but they're usually live-in mistresses. And they were tied to their husband, but had lower status, and their children were not heirs. So they weren't a threat to the line of succession. Number 5, a male soldier and a female prisoner of war. Legal marriage. Soldier and booty, basically. Number 6, a male rapist and his victim. Legal marriage. Number 7, a male and female slave could get married, and that was legal. And let's see, and they were supposed to produce more slaves, of course. That was the intent of that. And number 8, monogamous heterosexual marriage, which was usually arranged. Okay, so if you're into arranged marriages, we're all set. None of these models, these 8 models, were described as better than any of the others, and all appear to have been accepted. So, let's have a biblical view of marriage, I say. It is heartening that other, might we call them progressive Christians, we love to label ourselves, don't we? Take to heart the example of Jesus, who reinterpreted the laws in ways that led to more compassionate behavior toward minorities, like slaves, the disenfranchised individuals whose humanity was being trampled. Mount Hollywood UCC, following in this tradition, and the tradition of our denomination overall, has protected the rights of minorities in a variety of ways, one of which was declaring ourselves to be open and affirming, O&A, and lobbying on the side of marriage equality, which brings this beloved community, I believe, in closer alignment with the behavior of a compassionate Jesus and the behavior of our subversive Christian ancestors, our roots. You can always tell people I have subversive roots. As the secular world, perhaps spurred by the intolerance of some religious groups, moves itself toward affirming love and family in all its forms, and reflecting this in its laws about marriage rights, it's heartening to find Christian tolerance levels rising in a variety of denominations. This is a redemption story in the making. Pretty cool, we're living it, right? But it's a story that's going to take a lot of making and remaking, as social messaging continues to shape the ethics of our children, and still takes a lot of undoing. Peter asked me on Thursday if it was illegal for girls to play baseball. This is from a kid who has played t-ball and Little League baseball already for over half his life, and had girls on most of his teams, many of whom have outstripped the boys in skill. And of course it's not illegal. So I said so. Then why do they play softball instead? I don't know where this idea came from. Somewhere, in some movie or some conversation. So I reminded him of A League of Their Own, which Peter had watched with interest. But how do I explain something that is tradition or custom but not necessarily fair? How do I describe the difference between a law and a social habit, social custom? So this is something that I hope I never have to do for Peter when he's choosing whom to marry. In his world, it's a social norm for friends to have 2 moms or 2 dads, or in his case, 2 of each, adoptive and birth. Single parents, grandparents, parents of different colors, families of multiple colors. Peter's norms are far different than my parents' norms. Thanks be to God. Thank you, parents, but thanks be to God. So, in celebration of the fact that we now live in a state where it is legal for 2 people of any gender to make marriage vows to one another, we offer an opportunity for those who've been married in the last 2 years to come forward and have those vows blessed by a church, by God. And because we are a beloved community and have renewed our vows during the call to worship this morning, let's join together in a litany of renewal for our core relationships of love